I do not know the exact day I was born. I know the season, late summer, the heat still full on the fields, and I know the year was given to me later by my mother, who kept that kind of record in her head because there was no other place to keep it. She said I came in August, when the cotton was just beginning to open. 1846. That is what she told me, and I have held to it. My name is Ruth Naomi Calloway. Calloway was the name of the man who owned us, and I have kept it my whole life, not out of any feeling toward him, but because it is the name my mother gave me, and my mother is the reason I am here at all, and I will not change what she gave me to suit anyone's comfort, including my own. I was born on a cotton plantation in Macon County, Alabama. My mother's name was Celia. My father's name was Abraham, and he was sold away from us in the spring of 1849, when I was 2 years old or close to it. I do not remember him. I have tried over the years to find some trace of memory, a face, a voice, a hand, and there is nothing. He was gone before I was old enough to keep him. My mother never spoke of him directly, not to me, not in my hearing, and I understood even as a small child that the silence around his name was a kind of grief too large and too dangerous to open in the ordinary hours of an ordinary day. There were 9 of us in the cabin, my mother and her mother, who we called Mama Dora, and my mother's younger sister Hattie and Hattie's 3 children, and 2 men from another family whose cabin had been torn down when the Calloway son took over the north quarter. The cabin had 1 room and a sleeping loft where the children went at night, and a fireplace that heated well enough in the center of the room and not at all near the walls. I have slept in many places since that cabin. I have never been as cold as I was in that cabin in January. I want to tell you what the days were, because I think the days are what people do not understand when they think about slavery. They understand the violence, or they believe they understand it. They understand the buying and selling, but the days, the ordinary, relentless, grinding, ordinary days, those are harder to convey and more important to understand because the days were where the life actually was. We rose before light. That is not a figure of speech. Before there was any light in the sky, the bell rang in the yard and the people came out of the cabins and went to the fields. My mother was a field hand. She picked cotton from the time she could carry a sack until the war ended, and she was 34 years old. And in all those years she picked cotton every day that cotton needed picking, and hoed corn every day that corn needed hoeing, and did whatever else the overseer required on the days between. She was strong. She was the strongest person I have known in my life, and I have lived a long life and known strong people, and she was still the strongest. I was in the fields beside her from the time I was 5 years old. Not full work. Children were not put to full work until they were older, 9 or 10, but present, moving along the rows, learning the motion of it, being where everyone was because there was nowhere else to be and nothing else to do. I learned to pick cotton the way I learned to walk, by doing it, by watching the hands of people who knew how and making my hands do the same thing. The cotton bolls opened into a kind of star, white and soft in the center and sharp at the edges. The edges were the problem. The edges cut your fingers until your fingers learned how not to be cut, and you reached in and pulled the fiber from the boll and put it in the sack and moved to the next plant without stopping, without straightening up. without pause, because the weight of the sack at the end of the day was weighed, and the weight determined what the next day looked like for you. My mother's hands were extraordinary objects. By the time I was old enough to notice hands, hers were calloused so completely that she could reach into a briar patch without bleeding. The palms were like leather. But they was also the hands that braided my hair and held me when I was sick, and did the 100 small acts of mothering that she found the energy for at the end of days that would have finished a lesser person. I do not know where she found that energy. I have thought about it for 70 years, and I do not know. There was a woman on the place named Sarah who was the closest thing to a doctor any of us had. She was perhaps 50 years old when I was a child, which means she had been born into this before the century turned, and she knew the medicines that grew in the woods and the fields, which bark to boil for fever, which root to dry and powder for a cough that would not leave, which leaves to pack against a wound to pull the heat out of it. She delivered babies, and she laid out the dead, and she managed, somewhere in the middle of all of that, to transmit what she knew to the younger women, including my mother, so that the knowledge would not die with her. It did not die with her. My mother knew it, and she taught it to me, and I have used it, in the decades since, more times than I can count. I think of Sarah when I use it. I think of what it meant to carry knowledge the only way you were permitted to carry it, in your body, in your memory, passed from hand to hand in the dark, with no paper and no school, and no allowance for the possibility that what you knew was worth writing down. It was worth writing down. Everything she knew was worth writing down. But we were not permitted to write. That is the thing I want you to sit with, not as an abstraction, as a specific and deliberate policy. The people on that plantation were not illiterate because they had not been taught. They were illiterate because the teaching was against the law. In Alabama in the 1850s, it was a criminal offense to teach an enslaved person to read. The law was specific, and the enforcement was real. Literacy was a door, and the door was being deliberately, legislatively, violently kept shut. I learned to read anyway. I want to tell you how, because it matters how. There was a boy on the Callaway place, the youngest son, whose name was Edmund. He was 8 years old when I was 9. That means he was born the year after me. He and I had spent enough time together as young children. The children of the place were not entirely separated in the early years, not until they were old enough for the separation to mean something. We had a kind of wordless ease with each other, something neither of us ever examined or named. Edmund had a primer, a child's reading primer, the kind with the alphabet on the first page and simple words after it, the kind that was the ordinary beginning of education for a white child in Alabama in the 1850s. He showed it to me one afternoon, not with any particular intention, the way children show each other things they have without thinking about what the showing means. I looked at the letters. I asked him what they were. He told me. I asked him to show me again. He did. This went on for the better part of a year, in moments stolen from the ordinary margins of the day, the half hour before the evening bell, the Sunday afternoons that were the only time that was not explicitly spoken for. Edmund was not brave. He was not making a principled stand. He was a child who did not yet fully understand what the letters on the page meant in the world around us. What danger lived in the passing of that knowledge across the line that divided his life from mine? I understood. I understood very well, and I kept learning. By the time I was 11 years old, I could read simple texts. By the time I was 13, I was reading whatever I could find, which was not much. A fragment of a newspaper, a page from a discarded book, the words on the labels of the bottles in the overseer's shed that I read upside down through a crack in the wall on an errand. Every word I found I read. Every word I read I kept. I did not tell my mother for 2 years. When I finally told her, when I finally showed her that I could read the words in a scrap of the Macon Beacon that someone had used to pack a crate, and that I had smoothed out and kept hidden under the sleeping loft floor, she looked at the page and looked at me, and looked at the page again. Then she took my face in her calloused hands and held it for a long moment without speaking. She did not smile. It was not a smiling moment. She held my face, and she looked at me with an expression that I have spent 50 years trying to accurately describe, and cannot, not entirely. It was pride, and it was fear, and it was something that went further back than either of those things, something that had to do with all the years and all the people before me who had been kept from this, deliberately and violently kept from this, and what it meant that I had it now, and what it would cost if the wrong person found out. She never told anyone, not Mama Dora, not Hattie, not anyone. She kept my secret the way she had kept everything else, in her body, in her silence, with a completeness that cost her something she never accounted to me. The overseer's name was a man named Tillman. I will not give him the honor of a first name. Tillman was 28 years old when I was a child, and he had the manner of a man who had been given a small amount of power and had organized his entire sense of himself around it. He was not the worst thing on that plantation. I say that with precision and without any intention of softening what he was. He was not the worst thing because the worst things were structural, the law, the economy, the entire architecture of a society built on the premise that some people were property, and Tillman was only a man moving inside that architecture. But he was cruel in the small and daily ways that structural cruelty licenses in ordinary people, and I have not forgotten a single instance of it. He whipped my mother once, in the summer of 1857, when I was 11 years old. I will not say what the stated reason was, because the stated reason was not the reason, and giving it credence by repeating it would be a dishonesty I am not willing to commit. I was 50 yards away when it happened, and I could not move, and I could not look away, and I could not do anything at all. The helplessness of that moment, the complete and absolute helplessness of it, is something I have carried in my body since that morning, and will carry until I stop having a body to carry it in. My mother did not cry during it. She made no sound. That silence was the bravest thing I have ever witnessed. Braver than anything I have read in books about men in battles with weapons in their hands. She stood in the yard of that plantation, and she was silent through the whole of it. And then she went back to her work, and she did not look at me, and I understood why she did not look at me. If she had looked at me, she would have seen my face, and if she had seen my face, she would have broken, and she could not break. So she did not look. When freedom came, and I will not call it anything else, I will not reach for a softer word, freedom came in the spring of 1865. I was 18 years old. My mother was 34. Mama Dora was dead. Hattie was alive, and her children were alive. We stood in the yard of the Calloway place, all of us, on the morning the news arrived. and there was a long silence that I could not have described to you at 18 and cannot describe to you now, except to say that it was not a simple silence. It was a silence full of things too large and too old and too various for any noise we had available to contain. We did not know where to go. That is the truth that the word freedom does not prepare you for. The door opens, and you are standing in it, and you have spent your entire life learning how to survive inside the room, and nothing and no one has taught you what is on the other side of the door, or how to move in it. My mother knew one thing. She wanted to find my father. She had not spoken his name in my presence in 16 years. She spoke it on that morning. Abraham. She said it quietly, once, as though testing whether the sound was still available to her. Then she said she was going to find him. She did not find him. We learned eventually through the Freedmen's Bureau that Abraham had been sold twice after leaving us, had ended in Mississippi, and had died there in 1861, before the war was over, of a cause the record did not specify. My mother received this information from a man behind a desk in a government office in Macon, and she thanked him for it. We walked out into the street, and she sat down on the step outside, and she finally, after 16 years, allowed herself to cry. I sat beside her. I put my arm around her shoulders. She cried for perhaps 20 minutes, and then she stopped, and she stood up, and she said we needed to find somewhere to be before dark. We found somewhere to be. We found work, and then better work, and then a life that was ours in the full sense, built from nothing, built from the reading under the sleeping loft, and the medicine Sarah had passed on, and the strength my mother had never once, in my entire childhood, allowed me to see her doubt. I taught school for 31 years in Alabama and later in Ohio, where we moved in 1872. I taught the children of people who had been where I had been, and the children of people who had come from other countries with their own versions of the closed door and the kept-out knowledge. And I taught them all to read with the full understanding of what it meant to be given a thing that someone had once tried to make sure you could never have. I thought about Edmund every time I opened a primer in front of a new child. Edmund, who had shown me the letters without knowing what he was doing, who had given me the door without understanding what the door was. I hope he knew, eventually. I hope he lived long enough to understand what that afternoon meant. I never saw him again after 1865. My mother died in 1903. She was 72 years old, and she had lived, in the 38 years since freedom, a life that was hers in a way that no part of the previous 34 years had been. She had a house. She had her name. She had daughters who could read, and a granddaughter who was already, at 12 years old, sharper than anyone I had ever taught. She died in the house we had made, in her own bed, with her name on a deed in the county recorder's office, in a city where no one could sell her or silence her or take from her the things she had spent a lifetime accumulating against every effort to prevent it. I held her hand at the end. She was not frightened. She had earned the right not to be frightened, and she knew it, and so did I. Those are the facts of it. And facts, as I have always told my students, are the beginning of everything.